kind of get you engaged, interacting a little bit. Go ahead and just say hello if you want to say good afternoon, hello, anything in the chat. And, I'll get to see who all's here sort of by typing out their quick little greetings. Okay, hi there, Mateo, Armand, Samantha, Colin, L, Shad, Aya, Elias, Haley, Alex, Han, Riley, Catherine, Martin. Good to see you guys. I'm really happy to be with you. So, okay, today it's our first real class meeting where we're actually going to go into some of the course content and information. So we're going to take it slow at first, and then we'll pick up a little speed as we go. But I want to start just by kind of setting up a basic vocabulary for all of us that is important to have when you're thinking about topics in epistemology. There's some key terms and vocabulary items that everyone should be somewhat familiar with that'll kind of help us structure a lot of the information that we encounter as we go through this. So that's the first order of business. I'm going to try and walk you guys through some key important terms in epistemology and in philosophy. So that's the first point. Epistemology vocabulary. Epistemology vocabulary. Now, our class is called the theory of knowledge, right? And that's just the definition of the word epistemology. So when I write that, that just refers to the study of knowledge, the concept of knowledge, and topics that are related to that. So epistemology, that's a major branch of philosophy. Philosophy, as you guys may know, is a word that comes from Greek originally. It's based off of two roots. There's philia, which means to love, and then there's Sophia, which means wisdom. So like a bibliophile, a lover of books, audiophile is a lover of sound. So Sophia is nowadays mostly used as a name, but originally it's a Greek word for wisdom. So philosophy then means a lover of wisdom, or the love of wisdom in the abstract. And philosophers pursue the love of wisdom by trying to pose and attempt to answer some of the deepest questions that people can contemplate, in every area of human inquiry that is significant. So like, is there a God? Do we have souls, or are we just physical brains? What is the nature of time? What is the nature of morality? So philosophers pursue all these questions. And the area of philosophy that is the sort of emphasis in our class is this branch, which is all about considering the topic of knowledge. What is knowledge? What does it take to know something? What is the difference between really having knowledge and just having a lucky guess? So on and so forth. So anyway, now let's try and start to develop a little bit more of our vocabulary on this. And I'm going to go in a logical order. Some of these terms you have to define before you can really define the other ones, because they help to provide information that defines the additional terms. So the first one is going to be the word or the concept of a proposition. Proposition. Okay, now the word proposition, when it's used in philosophy and in philosophy of language, it refers to the meaning of a sentence. Okay, the meaning of a sentence. The meaning of a sentence. Now, you might see the definition and be puzzled at first, thinking, what is the difference between the meaning of a sentence and the sentence itself? Isn't the meaning of a sentence just a sentence? Well, not necessarily, because there can be cases, and I'll demonstrate in a moment, there can be cases where you have multiple sentences, more than one, but they express the same information. They have the same propositional content. Okay, so just let's think about one such example here. I'm going to go to the other side of the board. And I'm going to write two sentences right here, okay? So the first one says, the snow is white. And just below, I'm writing another sentence, which says, Der Schnee ist weiß. The snow is white. Der Schnee ist weiß. So I know probably nobody here, or maybe very few of us, have any working understanding of the language German, but you don't really need to probably use a little bit of quick inference to see the cognates that are involved here, because English is it is a Germanic language. But if you were going to guess what would you tell me you think is the answer here? How many sentences are there? Well, I'll give you that. There's two. There's clearly two different sentences. They're spelled differently. They sound different. They involve different symbols, okay? But how many propositions do you think I have listed there on that side of the board? Let me see anybody. Okay, Armand, you're saying one. Anybody else want to try their hand?
One.
Yes, one. Okay, good. That's correct. What's the reason behind your answer? Why is it that it's only one proposition? After all, there are two sentences. So why is it just one proposition? Armand, you say it's the same idea. That's one way to put it, sure. Anybody else have a different way of saying it? One statement? Okay, good.
It's the same sentence?
Well, it's not the same sentence, actually. There are two sentences. They're in different languages, so they're definitely different sentences. The right thing to say is that they express the same propositional content because they have the same meaning, right? They mean the same thing. It's the same information, just said in different languages. So der Schnee ist weiß is just the German way of saying in English that the snow is white. So although we have two different sounding sentences, and visually they do not look exactly the same, they convey the same exact content, and so they are the same proposition. Now, I use the example of two languages because I think that makes it pretty clear, but we could even do the same with one and the same language. For example, if I tell you that I am in Long Beach, that's one sentence. If I tell you that the city of Long Beach is where I am, that is another sentence, but it's the same information that is expressed. I'm just changing the subject of the sentence from me to the location, but I'm expressing the same exact information. It's identical. If I tell you that I have a cat, or if I tell you that a cat is something that I have, that is, again, one proposition expressed in two different sentence forms. So propositions are the meanings of the sentences that we use symbols and sounds to convey. And it's interesting and it's very philosophically deep when you think about this, because once you realize that there can be different sounds used to convey the same piece of info, that really lets you know that the sounds and symbols themselves are, in a sense, arbitrary, aren't they? I mean, the same information that gets expressed in one language can be conveyed in another language which sounds completely different, and with symbols that look completely different as well. We don't even have to imagine different possible worlds to understand that, because we have the material on the earth to see the point, right? If you look in Arabic, Chinese, or some other language, the characters or the sounds involved are far different from those that would be used in the English language. But of course, we can and do translate between them, and we can see that the same information can be found in either sense. So we can imagine far different languages, none of which actually exist, that have been developed by like alien cultures in different planets, where the same information could be produced by means of clicks, squeals, screeching noises, or whatever else. So the fact that we have these sounds that I'm using and these letters and symbols that I'm using to express information to you is, in a sense, just an accident, a contingency. It's not necessary to the expression of that piece of information or content that it be voiced in one set of symbols or sounds. Okay, now I start with proposition because it's fundamental. It is propositions which are the objects of our knowledge. It is propositional content that we either believe or deny, that we either know or do not know. So that's a base concept to start us off. Now, let me move on from that and to give you a new and additional vocabulary term. And this one, it piggybacks in terms of understanding it on the last definition. So I want us to consider what it means for a proposition to be true. What is truth? So I'll give you the definition, but let's think about it openly for a minute, see if we can talk about it. What do you think it would mean in case a proposition is true? What could that possibly mean? If we have a true proposition, like a true sentence, if you want, what's the difference, or what gives it the status of being true as opposed to false?
Maybe it has there's something that reinforces its truthfulness. Like there's something that oh, it's there. Like if you say that object is there, that object being there gives you a good idea that that statement might be true.
Okay, so let me work with what you said, and I see some comments in the chat too, so I'll just take all these points. You said there, Martin, that there's something like to back it up, maybe like if you say there's a marker or it's like an eraser on the desk, and then you see it, you can see that it's true. Yes, but I have to make some corrections too. It's not required for a proposition to be true that you are aware of its truth. Like right now, it could be true that there are aliens somewhere in the universe outside the planet Earth. That could be a fact. but I don't really know it's a fact because I can't prove it and I don't have the means by which to prove it. But if it's a fact, then it is true, regardless of the state of my knowledge. Does that kind of make sense? So when we have evidence, that gives us reason to believe something's true. But it can, of course, be that a sentence is true even if nobody knows about it and nobody has any proof for it. And that's why I have to say one thing about your comment too, Han. You say can be proven. Sometimes there are things that are true which nobody could prove because the evidence is no longer available. Like, let me give you a random example, like from like the world of true crime. If you guys know true crime stories, this should make sense. So suppose that somebody has committed murder and they've killed a person, and then they dispose of the body, and they dispose of the body in such a careful way that the body can never be found by anybody. Like they melt it down to ash, scatter it to the wind, put it in the ocean, whatever, and now there's just no evidence. No one will ever find it. Now, to the family members and loved ones of the victim, they've just got questions. What happened? Did they get lost? Did they commit suicide? Did they, fall into the ocean? Were they murdered? Who knows? They don't know the truth. But in my hypothetical, what is the truth about the status of the person? That they were murdered. I would love you to tell me. But anyway, yeah, so that would be the true fact in this situation. But is there any evidence of it? No. Evidence has been carefully and cleverly disposed of. So evidence is needed for us to have good justification for what we believe. But it can, of course, be possible for something to be true even when no one has any means to prove it or whatever. Okay, so that's why we don't say that when it's true, it's always provable or has been proven. Some things that are true haven't been proven yet, and they're just a matter of speculation for us, but they're still a fact. So that's why I kind of like the example of the definition that you gave there, Yuki. You say it is factually correct. That's pretty much right on the money. And here's the way I like to put it. A truth occurs when whatever the proposition says matches the facts of reality. Okay, so truth. Oops. When what a proposition says matches the facts of reality. Okay, when the propositional content matches what's really a fact. Okay, and now Armand, in your quote or comment, you say, or like mathematical proofs, there could exist a proof, but no one has articulated it yet, or maybe will never be able to articulate it. Sure, yeah, there could be proofs in mathematics or logic that are yet to be discovered, but I guess in some kind of abstract sense, the proof is capable of discovery, and therefore it's a true proof that's waiting for the discovery. But I sort of prefer to discuss empirical examples of propositions for the moment, because the truth maker of a mathematical proposition is a bit of a complex concept. Like what makes 1 + 1 = 2 a true statement? Is it because there's like numerals in the third realm of Plato that have the status of adding to 2, or is it because actual objects, when they're grouped together in that combination, add up to 2? So empirical examples are easier. Like if I say there's a marker on the table, clearly that's the truth maker, the marker that is on the table, and it's an easy example to point out. So anyway then, truth. It's a match. It's a match between what? Whatever the content of the sentence is and whatever the facts are. So if I say to you right now that I'm wearing glasses, is it true? Yes, surely it is. I mean, there they are. You can see that's a fact. But if I told you I was wearing a hat, that would be a statement. It would be a proposition, but it doesn't match what's factually here. So that would be false. So statements, people can write or say anything, but whether they're true depends on whether the facts of reality mirror what the statement says. And so if I told you that, I'm 100 years old, it's just not true. That's a falsehood. That's not the actual fact about when I was born. If I told you I was born in the 80s, unfortunately, that is true. So that would be something that would be a fact, according to the actual time and place of my birth. Now, Yuki, you say unless our reality is similar to the Matrix. But no, even if our reality is similar to the Matrix, the definition of truth still holds. It just means that everything we're saying is false. Saying that there's a marker on the table is then false because I'm in a simulation and there's no such thing as the table or the marker. I'm just seeing hallucinations or like simulated images. But the definition of truth would still hold good, right? Because even if you're in a simulation, it would still be the case that if you could express a proposition that matched a fact, then it would be true. Like maybe saying I'm a brain in a vat then would be a true statement. But we'll talk about that a little later. We'll talk more about the brain in a vat thing. Okay, so anyway, truth. When what a proposition says matches the facts of reality. I'm going to take it slow and make sure this all sinks in. So can anybody give me an example of a few statements that are true? That's not going to be controversial, I hope, but we can all just say, yes, that's certainly a true statement. Like what?
The sun is a star.
The sun is a star. Fair enough. Yeah, that's a true fact. So you say something and it's true. How about an event, something that has happened, maybe in history, rather than a definition? Like, wow. Okay, go ahead.
I was born.
Yeah, you were born, Mateo. That's good, but it's not exactly a major historical event. Of course, it's important to you, and I agree. But that's true. No, it's certainly true. You were born. That's how you're even able to interact. Nick, you say water is wet. Yes. Another piece of a definitional truth, kind of, though. I mean, that's like an attribute of water. It's a characteristic trait that it has. Can anybody point out a real historical event, please?
January 20th, 2021, Biden was inaugurated into office.
Yes. Okay, good. That's true. It's recent history. It's not like, Berlin Wall fell in 1990 or something. That's also, I guess, relatively recent in historical terms. You could say a man planted a flag on the moon in 1969. You could say the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. So there's all kinds of facts, right? I mean, there's just an infinite number of them, really. And when you say a fact, you're just saying something that matches reality. When you say something false, just to the contrary, you're making a statement, but that's not what really happened. So if I told you the world's flat, this is false. It could be something that I think, but it's not really the case. So it's a false statement. It doesn't match the facts. Okay, now, since we know what a truth is, that sets us up for our next piece of vocabulary, which is what is a belief? Okay, so what is a belief? Let's figure that out. And a hint for you is that the definition of the concept involves the word truth. So let's think about that. What does it mean to believe a proposition? To have a person that believes a proposition means what, you think?
You think it's true?
Exactly. Very good, Mateo. That's right. So a belief. It is when an epistemic agent thinks that a proposition is true. Okay, so when a person thinks that a proposition is true, then that means they believe that proposition. 1 second, sorry, I have a call. I just need to take it. I'll be right very quick. Hello? Yeah. Yes, hi. I'm good. I'm sorry to say that I am kind of in the middle of a little work task right now, but I have a few seconds. And then if you need to leave me a more detailed message after this, that's also fine, but I wanted to take your call. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Yeah. I mean, I already sent it back because I thought it would probably be prudent, and I didn't want to delay. But after I did, I thought, oh, maybe I should call to double check. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I mean, I just want to say this, that in the incident itself, the car ahead of me, it's like they struck the car ahead of them. And in my view, they rear-ended them first, causing me to have no time to react because they came to a dead stop on the freeway. So, I mean, Maybe I could have had a little more distance or been a little bit quicker to react, but a little bit of blame comes, I think, to the middle part for, in my view, initiating the whole sequence of events. But yeah. Yeah. Sure, yeah. I know, yeah, I know. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I know, yeah. In this case, it was kind of like that. But I've got no real complaints about it. I just wanted to see what the procedure was and what was going on. So yeah, is there any other info I need now, or? Mm-hmm. 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 Okay. Okay, then that sounds good. So how does it affect my rates? And it's not paid out by me; it's all through insurance, right? Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
I think wet means like water sticks to itself.
Yeah.
Water sticks to something, so it's wet, and water definitely sticks to itself. So I'm pretty sure water's wet, but I'm no chemist.
Okay.
I would agree. I think that wet means, I'm looking at the Merriam-Webster dictionary, covered or soaked with water or another liquid, or like saturated with liquid. And I think water is saturated with itself and with wetness. So I think water's wet.
I'm not sure you can say that you can be saturated with your own self. I'm not sure that it can qualify, like, if it is your own self,
Isn't that what being homogeneous means?
All right, guys. Hey, sorry so much. I
agree with that assessment.
I really didn't want to step away from the meeting, but I had to deal with the call
Hey, Dr.
involving my
Bullich.
insurance policy, and I couldn't ignore it. But I'm back. Thank you guys so much. Okay, so what was the little discussion happening in the background here?
Yo, is water wet?
Is water wet? Of course it's wet. I mean, I think
Case closed. Case closed.
I think it's a logical truth that it's wet, because it's just sort of like saying like a brown dog is brown. It's like saying of a thing that it is identical to itself. So I don't think it's a contingent feature of water that it's wet. It's just sort of like that's a characteristic of it that is built right in. It's priced right into like what kind of substance it is at a chemical level. But anyway, yeah, like you guys have had some interesting conversations about what it really means for water to be wet. Let me go up a little bit. I just want to make sure I've not left anything important behind. Anyone that's taken the class. Oh, so Armand, you think another person says water's not wet. I mean, okay, there's a sort of perspectival element to the concept of wetness. It's a qualitative thing. It's experienced by the subject. So you might say in itself, when there's no such person or being to experience the wetness, does it have the quality? Is this what they call secondary instead of primary quality? Like the concept of something being spicy, right? Is it spicy in itself? That's only something that comes out in the interaction between the perceptual system and the food. These are deep questions, but they're a bit, in a way, a field of what we need to say just for the moment. But hold on to those interesting and deep questions because they'll certainly...
Wait, I have another question.
Sure.
One more.
One more.
Do we have knowledge of water?
Not what's the proposition? Because water's not a proposition.
That it's wet.
Yes, I think we have knowledge that it's wet. How could we not?
Okay,
I mean,
okay.
we drink it, we swim in it, we get hit by it when it comes from the sky. So if you have a problem with the definition of the word wet, that's another issue. Like this is not a closed definition. This is an ambiguous word. Maybe you think there's no such thing as the concept of wet. But if we grant that the property of wetness exists, water has that property, yes. But let's follow up on this. So belief. When a person thinks that a proposition is true, that's where we were at, right? So people can disagree about what they believe, and of course they often do. Take a simple statement like the Earth is round. That's a proposition, and most, I would hope all of us, believe that's true. So when you hear that the Earth is round, you hear the proposition, you say true, you agree with it, you take it to be true, you think it's true. There are flat earthers though, and in the flat Earth society, those people say this is false. I do not believe that the Earth is round. So the same proposition, you have two subjects. One says I believe it, and the other says no, I don't believe it because I don't think that's the facts of reality. So one interesting thing to remember and to always know is that truth is objective. Truth is just the facts, and the facts are what they are, regardless of what anybody thinks. Beliefs, of course, are subjective to the individual. It's the person's viewpoint or judgment about what is true or not. And beliefs can be false, but truth, of course, being true, can't be false. So when we've talked about the shape of the planet being round, and two people that don't agree about it, they cannot both be correct. It can't be like, well, we're both correct. It's round, but it's also flat. That's just a physical impossibility. So there's one set of facts, and those people who think those things are factual have true beliefs, and those that don't have false beliefs. So it's actually one of the most important things, isn't it, in life, to have as well as you can, because none of us are perfect, but to the best of your ability to try and form true beliefs, because by definition of truth and belief, if you have a head full of false beliefs, this means that you're out of touch with reality. You think the world is a certain way, but that's not the way that it actually is. And so in order for you to have the best appreciation of reality and fact, you should try your best to form true beliefs. It's not easy sometimes, but we do the best that we can. And one of the best ways for us to establish true beliefs is to try and form them with evidence or with justification. So maybe I'm saying too much because I still want you to be able to try and reason out what these definitions are. But the next one that we're going to go through is what we call justification. But we're good on belief, everybody? How about this? Well, I don't know. I mean, I could say, give me examples of beliefs, but that's so easy, right? Like, oh, this guy believes in Santa Claus. This guy believes that Santa Claus exists. This guy believes that the moon landing didn't happen, So there's different beliefs, and sad to say, we can't all agree on a lot of things, but for the most part, rational people come to consensus, and we try our best to form the right, correct beliefs. What is justification? What do you think it is to have a justified belief? So as opposed to it being unjustified. What do you think on that? Justified belief, anybody have a view or just an intuition, some type of...
Maybe there's like something material to back it. So like I'm kind of using the statement from earlier again. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it'd be like a justification would be like, if you're talking about what the justification is, it would be the thing that validates the proposition.
That's very good. Yes, exactly. So now we can say evidence and so forth. That's what justification is all about. Truth can be present even when a person's just randomly guessing. But justification is when you have solid evidence or reasons to support your belief. Okay, good. So having good evidence / reasons to support one's belief. Having good evidence or reasons to support one's belief, that's justification. Okay, so very much so, Yuki and Shad and all the rest. Does it have to be good to be justification? Generally speaking, yes. There could be evidence that a person cites that's not really proper evidence or that doesn't really raise the probability of the proposition that they're basing it on. So ordinarily, we would say it has to be good evidence. Like if I said to you, there's a marker on this table, therefore my first child will be a girl. That's evidence, but it's not at all the kind of evidence that gives much support to the proposition. So good evidence is the right type of evidence to have justification. And there's, of course, more to be said about what good evidence is. Bayes, one of the great game theorists and statisticians, said that it has to do with something that raises the probability of the proposition that it is based on, which still, of course, leaves a lot of open questions, but that's the general point. Armand, what are the sufficient criteria for good or compelling evidence? What makes it good? You guys are right on point with the questions. Yeah, it's just something that raises the probability of something else. Here, let me give you some examples. Suppose that you're an investigator and you're trying to determine whether Jones is guilty of the crime, right? And you found DNA evidence on the crime scene that matches Jones. And you see his fingerprints are on the murder weapon that was recovered from the crime scene. This is evidence, at least 2 pieces, that substantially raise the probability that he is in fact the killer. And so you would maybe present that evidence in a court if this was like in a legal context, and that would give people justification for believing that he's guilty, instead of just saying, oh, I have a random hunch, or I'm just basing it on nothing. Yeah, so Catherine, can people not give poor justifications? If so, does this just mean that their belief is weak? Yes, so justification is a matter of degree. That's a fair point. You can have better or worse justification. So say that you believe your partner's cheating on you, and it's just because they didn't return your calls on a given afternoon. That's maybe not the strongest evidence, but suppose that you looked at their phone and you can see a whole bunch of mysterious messages to an unknown party that seem to be like romantic. And then you also see that they have like lipstick on their collar when they come home late. Now the evidence is getting stronger, you know, so the probability that the proposition they're cheating is true seems like it's higher when the evidence is more compelling. Probabilities for inductive reasoning. Can we ever deduce that a justification is good? I mean, induction is never perfect, as you know. Induction always leaves at least some small, slight chance at least that the inductively based belief is false. But we just do the best that we can. I'm sure that we have an intuitive sense, don't we, of what better and worse evidence could be. So I guess when multiple sources of evidence all converge on the same claim, that adds further justification. When evidence is of a variety of sorts, whether it's testimonial, perceptual, inductive, or what have you. Yuki. In this case, would it even be able to show any justification for theories like Schrodinger's cat? Yeah, so you mean like the Schrodinger's cat hypothesis that, well, there's different interpretations of it. This takes us a little bit into some background information that I don't know if all of our students are aware of, but very briefly. In quantum physics, if you fire a photon, a single photon, through a half-silvered mirror, then in 50% of cases, the photon will pass through the mirror, and in other 50% of cases, it will be reflected off, like a bounced off photon of light. Now, say that there's a cat in a box behind the mirrored plate, and if the photon strikes the magnetic field where the box is, it will release a gas that kills the cat. So firing the photon through the half-silvered mirror, you think in half of cases, cat is going to die. In the other half of cases, he'll get lucky and the photon will reflect away. Now, there are results in quantum physics that basically show us that the behavior of a photon or any particle is extremely weird because it's wave and particle-like. And the wave-like properties of photons means that they appear to traverse an infinite number of pathways on their way to a single location from the emission point to their landing point. Now, some theorists of quantum physics account for this phenomenon by saying that there are actually different branches of quantum reality, like a multiverse, so to speak, one in which the photon passes through and kills the cat, and another in which the photon just reflects off and the cat is spared. Another interpretation is the collapse theory, which says that the photon actually takes infinite number of paths, interferes with itself, but at the last second collapses into one discrete position, either on the magnetic plate or reflecting away. So Yuki, to take your question and bring it full circle, if there are different possible worlds, then we cannot possibly have evidence from our own world about what happens in the other ones, except by means of this kind of inference, like looking at the indirect effects that the particle has in the interference pattern as it traverses its path towards the magnetic plate. So to make your question a little more comprehensible, perhaps for all of us, if there is a multiverse and stuff like that, and there are counterparts of us, like infinitely many, taking different actions and seeing different outcomes, then we might not be able to gain direct evidence about what is happening to the counterparts just by looking at what's happening in this branch of reality. But look, I digress. That's quite heady. For the moment, I just want to say this. Justification is having good evidence or reasons to support a person's belief. If, for example, you ordered a package, you received a notification that it was delivered to your doorstep, and then you get home and it's not there, but you see a whole bunch of footsteps leading away from your doorstep in the snow, you might say the footsteps provide at least some decent evidence that the package was stolen. And so if you then believed it was stolen, you'd have justification for believing it, as opposed to having no justification if there's no evidence. Okay, now, a couple more of these vocabulary terms, and then we'll start putting them together. There's also, importantly, the concept of an epistemic agent. Epistemic agent is just a sort of, no, it's good, Yuki, I appreciate that. It's always good. So an epistemic agent is just a sort of piece of jargon in philosophy that refers to a being that is capable of having beliefs or knowledge, okay? A being that is capable of having beliefs or knowledge. Now, we don't often stop to consider the thought of what things in this universe have that ability, because we are those things. And so usually just from the first person point of view, you don't stop and reflect on how unique and rare it is. But if you really think about this, it's quite fascinating, and it's really, I feel like, awe-inspiring that the vast majority, okay, of physical matter in this universe is not living matter. It's not anything that's alive, that has perception, that has the consciousness, right, like we have. So making it concrete, the marker here that I'm using, is this an epistemic agent? Can this marker have beliefs or knowledge? What do you say?
No.
No, it cannot. And I know it's abundantly obvious to us why not, but just humor me. Why can't it have beliefs or knowledge? Why isn't it an epistemic agent? What's missing or what's wrong?
For one, it can't even communicate to us any knowledge that it may have.
Well, it's, I would say, more fundamental than that, isn't it? Because it's not a living being. It has no sentience. It doesn't have a central nervous system, a brain. It has no consciousness. So there's nothing it's like to be the marker. It can't perceive. It can't judge. It's not peering out into the world with a point of view on it. But now, what about us? Are you and I epistemic agents? Certainly we are. So we're not just objects, are we? We're also subjects. We have a point of view, a perspective. We can judge. We can affirm. We can deny. We can take in information and believe it or disbelieve it. We can have knowledge, or we can fail to have knowledge on certain subjects. So we are epistemic agents. And it's interesting, in philosophy, we don't just study everything else outside of us, but also us ourselves. We're fascinating things, human beings. We are epistemic agents, and we can take on beliefs and form knowledge. Are there any other epistemic agents that are not humans? What do you think? If so, who could or what could they be? Okay, dogs. I like that, Colin. Is it only the dogs? I would think maybe certain of the non-human animals.
Maybe like the other primates.
Certainly the primates, but I don't think it's only limited to the higher reaches of the phylogenetic tree. I think many life forms that are non-human can at least have rudimentary beliefs and perhaps knowledge. It's a far run short of human knowledge, though, at least in a sophisticated adult human like us, because a dog or a cat is never going to know that we're the third planet from the sun, or it's never going to know what's going on in the periodic table of elements or the Pythagorean theorem, or it will never know key events in history like, the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776. So humans, due to our language and due to our advanced cognition, we have a wealth of knowledge and facts at our disposal that far surpass that of animals, but animals can certainly, I think, know certain things, at least on a limited range, like when there's something that is a source of danger or sustenance, when there's an opportunity for reproduction, or maybe when there's an activity that they would like and they see that it's possible. Maybe if you've had pets, certainly I would think they know when we're about to feed them or when we're going to take them on a walk or whatever. So maybe there are some non-human epistemic agents, but we're the most sophisticated that we're aware of anyway. Could there be non-human epistemic agents that are advanced intelligent life on other planets? That's a possibility that's been much played out in science fiction, but we are not 100% sure yet. I guess we don't know that. Yuki, can plants be considered an epistemic agent? They reach towards light, yes, Catherine, but I don't think that there's any kind of belief state. Like there's no proposition entertained by them. At the same time, fair enough, animals aren't thinking of propositions, but they at least have the ability to move, I think being mobile is a part of having sentience, because nature has equipped those beings that have the ability to use locomotion and move around to move themselves away from something that's a source of pain or danger. And plants don't need to do that because they don't have like the sensation of pain to run from or to flee from. So I think that there's no cognitive state that plants are in, but they are life forms because they conduct homeostasis and they take in resources from their environment and use that to propagate. The Venus flytrap, yes, they eat the flies, but once again, it's a similar point. You know, it's a living system, but I would say anyway, I mean, you may have different views on this, but I don't think that they really have any kind of sentience, even on a base level. Anyway, though, the question is only how far up you have to go to get towards something that has sentience, and at least we know we have it. How far beyond us that extends could be a matter of some debate. I would probably stop once we get down to the level of very primordial, even insects and stuff. I'm not sure that tiny little gnats and so on have much thought, but then again, maybe that's an ungenerous estimation of their cognitive abilities. Okay, yeah, so epistemic agents. Now, next thing is I'm going to try and help you guys understand how the ancient Greeks, Plato and others, defined the concept of knowledge. So this is the classical account of knowledge that lasted for thousands of years. It was first written about in the ancient world by the Greek philosopher Plato and also his teacher, as you know, Socrates. So the ancient Greek account of knowledge is this, that knowledge is equivalent to a justified true belief. Knowledge, a justified true belief. And sometimes philosophers and epistemologists like to use an acronym for that just to make it a little simple. So K, standing for knowledge, is equal to JTB, just kind of like a little formula here, where obviously these three letters each stand for one of the three criteria for knowledge, having a true belief, but it's also justified. These three conditions for knowledge are claimed to be individually necessary, but only jointly sufficient. So each one is required, and you could not have knowledge if even one of them was missing. But if you do not have all of them, then it's still not enough, right? So they're all required, but they all have to be present too. So like here, I'll try and work with you on some examples to make it seem plausible. Could a person know, let me get your question first here, Shad. You say we only know something is an epistemic agent because it conveys meaning, which as Professor Vulich said, the medium of which is arbitrary. What if something expresses meaning in a way that we can't observe, in which case couldn't the marker also be an epistemic agent? You know, Shad, the thing about that, and that's I think a wise point, but I don't think it applies to non-living creatures, because I think we have enough knowledge about the way that consciousness works, knowing that it requires some type of cognitive neural system, to say with confidence that the marker does not have that, so it's not possible for it to have consciousness. At the same time, if we're living in a universe with forces that are far weirder than anything we can possibly fathom, such that every object around us has a sort of consciousness within it, then maybe that would be a fair point. But in keeping with science, I believe that it's not a mystery or a guessing game how consciousness arises. I think it has to do with the functioning of brains. And so absent a brain, something wouldn't have the resources required to have consciousness. And Armand, you say, that's what I meant by the marker can't even communicate any knowledge, so how would we observe in an instance where we could say it does have knowledge? It's a little behaviorist, though. You know, things can sometimes have knowledge and thoughts when they can't communicate. But I take the point. To this, though, knowledge is a justified true belief. So I was going to ask you just a simple question. Could somebody know that Dr. Vulich is 10 feet tall in height? Could somebody know that? No, you couldn't know that. Why not? Why is that not eligible to be known? Because it's simply not true. Exactly, it's false. So it's not possible to know something which is false. Now, not that it's not verifiable. It is verifiable that that's false. But I guess that it's true can't be verified. Let's say this. Possibly, if a person was really, I don't know, maybe hallucinating on drugs or something, they could never know that I was 10 feet tall. But at least theoretically, it's possible for somebody going through an episode or something to what? Not know it, but what? Believe it, right? So keep in mind, a belief is something that can misfire. You can have a belief that's incorrect, but you can't have incorrect knowledge, because knowledge is a success term. It implies that you got it right. Here's another example. Suppose we have a student who's taking a multiple choice question on a test, and it's a history test. And the question was, What year was the Declaration of Independence signed in the United States? So they have 4 multiple choice options. Letter A says 1776, B says 1876, C says 1976, and then D says 2030. So the student, knowing it's a history class, they quickly rule out D because it's in the future, so that doesn't apply. But they're totally lost when it comes to their dates and key events. So what they answer on the test for this question is B, 1876. Now here's a simple question. Did they know the answer to the question? Did they have knowledge? No. Because why? What was wrong with their answer? It was not correct. It was not true. Now, if knowledge did not require truth, then we would tell people that whether they got the right answer or not, they still get credit for knowing, because whether you're right or wrong, true or false, it's all knowledge. Certainly, though, that's not how it works. You only get credited for knowing when you reply with the correct answer, when you get something that's true, in other words. So, problematic thing there is it's missing the truth condition, his belief that 1876 was the year. Furthermore, and we could put it differently, with respect to the proposition that 1776 was the year, he doesn't know that because he doesn't even believe it. If he believed it, he would have given that answer. So with respect to the correct proposition, he didn't believe it. And with respect to the proposition that he did fill in, it wasn't true. So either way you go, this is a person that didn't really have knowledge regarding that question. Now let me change the example a bit. Suppose we have a student, they're looking at that same question on the test, A, B, C, D, 17, 18, 19, 76, and then 2030. And they're like, man, I'm really bad with dates. I know it's not 2030 at least, but it could be any of these other 3, and I'm totally lost. Well, I don't know. I'm 17 years old, and that's my favorite number. That's my lucky number. I'm just going to fill in A then. So that student believes the answer is A, but do they know that that's the answer? No, they don't. What's missing here? Because it's true in this case, what they filled in. Well, it is a belief, Armand, because at least for the moment, they took it to be the correct answer. So let's not go in that direction. What's the missing point here? It's not justified, right? So they gave the right answer, but they didn't give it because they had any evidence that it was the right answer. So it's not like if you ask them, why did you fill that in, that they could say, oh, I have valid reasons because the framers of the Constitution convened the Constitutional Convention in the month prior to that, blah, blah, blah. They would give you the actual circumstances. So who knows the answer? It's the person who gives the correct answer. Of course, by doing that, it implies they believed it, but they were also aware of the evidence or at least some reasons why it was the true answer. In the other case, they'll get credit for getting the right answer, of course, but they didn't really know it because they were just guessing and it was just based off of a hunch. Now you say, Yuki, there is some because he used the process of elimination, perhaps, but it's not much elimination. It's just eliminating 2030. Maybe I shouldn't have put that in there if that's throwing you off. So let's just suppose it was A, B, and C then, and then you can't say that. But anyway, the whole point is simply that although you could get a right answer, if it's just a lucky guess, it's not knowledge. Here's another example. So right now, take the campus of Orange Coast College. I'm sure that there's some students and some staff that are there, even though we're remote for the time being. Let me just make a guess. I'm telling you, I believe there's an even number of people on the campus. So a number that could be divided by 2 and result in a whole number. What's the probability that that's true? That there's an even number of people present on the campus of Orange Coast? What's the probability? It's 50-50, that's right. It's 0.5. And that's just because that's how numbers work. The integers, they're all either even or odd. So given that it's a number, it's halfway likely to be an even number. But can you say that I know that there's an even number of people on the campus over there right now? No. Suppose I want it to be true and I love even numbers. So I have that kind of OCD belief. I'm like, that's got to be, there's an even number of people there. I could be right about it. I have a halfway chance of being right about it. But no one can really say I know because I'm missing evidence. What would make it such that I do know? If I went over there and I conducted an actual census of the number of people, counted the heads, then saw that it was divisible by 2. At that point, what was before just speculation or guesswork became a piece of knowledge, something that is known and not just, if it's true at all, a lucky guess. Okay, so getting a lucky guess is not the same thing as knowing. This is part of the reason why, as a professor, I don't like to give multiple choice tests. And it's because a student can get credit for something they do not know, as you guys all have experienced in your life at times. So, justify true belief. If any of the conditions is off, it's not enough for knowledge. 2 out of 3 is not good enough. Now, Colin, you say we don't know God exists. Yeah, I mean, that's something that is probably true. At the same time, though, I don't want to presuppose it, because there are some theists that would argue that their belief in God is so rationally justified based on the consideration of arguments or historical evidence that they might produce, that they would say that it's something they know. But if you have doubts about whether it's even true, of course you can't know something false. So if there's no God, then nobody knows God exists by default. And if God does exist and you think that there's really no good evidence that people base their belief on, then that might also be another condition of not having knowledge. But to be charitable to those that have belief in God, I often just think it depends on the character of the evidence they're relying on, and of course whether the key question is true or not. So that's a big question, isn't it? Yeah, it's something that I can't obviously settle or resolve. Depends on the definition of God. That's tricky. Yeah, well, actually, in other classes I sometimes talk about it. You say it's subjective, but the classical Christian philosopher Saint Anselm believed that everyone has the same idea of God, which is that he's the greatest conceivable being. And if that is so, he believes you can argue rationally that he must exist because existence is greater than to not exist. But anyway, we don't have to go off on God for the moment. Maybe we'll circle back to that later. Knowledge is a justified true belief. Let me give you one analogy to this so it comes clear again. Like if you had 3 ingredients that were all required to bake a cake, so you needed flour, sugar, and water, each one would be necessary. Like you could never have the cake without the sugar element, or without the water, or without the eggs. But if you only have one of them by themselves, it's certainly not enough. Okay, so if you just have a bucket of water, it's necessary for the cake, but is it sufficient for it? No. By itself, it's not going to turn into a cake. It needs to be supplemented by the other ingredients, okay? And the same with just having sugar and water. That's not enough. You also need the flour, or whatever I said was the other third ingredient. So in the same sense here, I don't know, it's an analogy, but these are like the 3 ingredients that bake the so-called cake of knowledge. And if even one is missing, it's not going to produce that. So 1 or 2 out of 3, it's still a failure of having knowledge. Okay. So take the earth is round as the proposition. Does the flat earther know it's true? No, because they disqualify themselves from knowledge because they don't even what? The flat earther does not know the earth is round because they simply do not what? Which condition is missing? Well, actually, I was going in a different direction, Yuki. We can talk about that too, but they don't even believe it. They don't believe that the earth is round. So if you don't believe it, then of course you don't know it, right? If a person doesn't believe that the moon landing happened, then they don't know that it happened because they don't believe that it did. So they eliminate one of the conditions by refusing to believe something which is in fact true. And you could also say that they don't know that the earth is flat because their evidence is bad, and also because it's false. But anyway, yeah, they'll try to give evidence. They'll say, well, when you're standing on it, doesn't it look flat? You know, I don't see it. I'm tilted anywhere when I'm just standing on the surface. This is kind of a bad argument, but it's evidence of a kind, I suppose. Okay, now, no justification, you don't have knowledge, even if you get a true belief. A belief that's justified, it's not knowledge either if it's false. And let's go into that. Can anybody think of a scenario where a person would have a belief which is justified, but actually it still turned out to be false because though they had evidence, it was misleading? Like what kind of case could that be? A person forms a belief with decent reasons. You know, you can't blame them for having no reasons, but it turned out false. You say hypothesis, but I need something more specific. Like I'm thinking of an example where a person would have formed this belief on a good basis, but then it was false. Okay, so we're the center of the universe. That's a possibility, Armand. You know, for a long time in history before Galileo and Copernicus, it was believed that we were the center of the universe. And there were certain reasons for that. Ancient Greeks like Aristotle believed that if the world was always moving, because we're, you know, in orbit around a central point like the sun, then we would feel wind resistance constantly as we were moving. And they also thought that if the earth was always rotating and moving, then if you jumped up, it would slide underneath you because the surface of it is moving while you elevate. But of course, that's false because as Galileo showed later, and then Einstein, there's such a thing as relativity of motion. So we're all moving on the same surface of the earth at the same steady rate, and it's a continuous rate of motion. So we don't feel like the effects of like stopping and starting the acceleration. As an example, when you're in a car and you flip a coin. It's not like the coin flies to the back window because the car underneath it is sliding through, because it shares the same state of velocity that the whole car has. So anyway, I'm just going into the details as to why, yeah, it might have been justifiable for pre-modern people to think we were the center of the universe. But of course, we've proven and shown that that's false with all the ample tools that we have at our disposal today. Another example, deceit, you say, Elias. That's good, yes. So suppose that someone is cleverly deceiving somebody. That means that the person who has been deceived is going to end up having a false belief because of the deception, but it might be justified because of the evidence that the clever trickster is planting, you know? So suppose that I want someone to believe that I'm dead, and, you know, I fake my death, and, you know, my family and friends all believe that I'm dead. They might say, well, we have evidence because we saw the suicide note, or we saw, you know, the photos of the crime scene that were sent to us. But if this was an elaborate hoax, then those people would have had a justified but false belief. Matteo, you say, the clock reads 1 p.m. A person has a justified belief that it is 1 p.m., but the time is noon. Sure, yeah. So suppose this is a broken clock, and maybe they've woken up late, you know, from a late night of slumber, and they look at it, and it has been working perfectly all heretofore, you know, to this point. But when they look at it, this is the first time that it's actually failed to change the time after 1 a.m. So when they look at it, they think that the clock hands are showing 1 p.m., but it's actually 12 noon. It would be justified to have relied on the evidence of the clock, but it would have been false in that instance. The court case, very good, Colin. A person is deemed not guilty. Evidence provided in the courtroom gave reasonable doubt, but yet they were guilty, let's suppose, right? Yeah, so suppose there's a guilty party with very good lawyers, and they were able to convince the jurors that they're not guilty. Then in that case, the jurors that have voted for not guilty had a belief that was justified based on the evidence presented, but yet they got the wrong verdict. Okay, so it's possible to have a justified but false belief. And in that case, of course, you don't know, since it's simply false. If all your friends are planning a surprise party and they tell you that they're out of town just so they can surprise you when they show up at your house as you come in late at night from work, you would have been perfectly justified in believing they're all in like Florida right now on vacation because they sent you all these messages and postcards and things. So I'm just giving you examples. Now, all that is just to reinforce the base definition here. For you to have knowledge, you have to believe something, you have to think it's true. That's the first point. But that's not enough. It has to actually be correct. So you have to have the correct belief, and that means it's true. But even if you have a belief and it's true, if there's no evidence for it, you're just guessing and you don't really know. So that's why all three conditions are required. Okay, now, the next thing to talk about then is the discussion of this whole topic that was provided by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. So I want to tell you guys a little bit about the life of Socrates and Plato. Very interesting, and it's fundamental for the study of philosophy because, as you guys probably know, those are some of the founding father type figures of the study of philosophy in the West anyway. So now, I'm just opening my book to the right page. Yeah. So Plato, anyway, he's the author of the dialogue that we're going to look at, and he lived from 428 until 347 BC, before the Common Era. Okay, so that's a long time ago. That's 428 years before the life and events depicted in the Bible of Jesus Christ in the early Christian era. So prior to AD. That's why his death year is a smaller number than his birth year, because as he's getting older, he's approaching year 0 on the Julian calendar. Now, Socrates is a little older even than Plato in terms of when he was born. He lived from 469 to 399 BC. So, you know, he was born 41 years prior to Plato, a couple generations before, and Plato lived on for another like 50 years beyond when Socrates died. Now, a couple words about the life of Socrates, quite interesting. And some of you may know it, but if you don't, here's a quick crash course on the basic facts of what happened with Socrates. So it's ancient Greece, everybody, hundreds of years before the Common Era, and it's Athens. In Athens, there was a town square, and that would be where, like, it would be the sort of ancient equivalent to like a modern downtown. So people are engaging in commerce, socializing, trading, entertainment, and all the rest. Socrates was a long-term citizen of Athens, whole life. And he's now up in his advanced years, getting close to 70 years old. But he developed this reputation throughout his life for being a person that would set up shop in the town square of Athens, and he would engage people in conversation. He's a brilliant, witty conversationalist and great at dialogue, debate, and rhetoric. And he would talk with people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. Some people, high up members of the Athenian government and military, all the way down to everyday common people and everyone in between. And he had this amazing skill and this talent for engaging people in discussion and dialogue. And by the time they were done talking with Socrates, he would have gently led them to different ideas than what they had at the first. So he would kind of get people to reconsider their settled views, or at least to admit that they didn't have as much confidence about them as they had before. And this was an amazing skill of his that generated a lot of interest and some following. In one example, there's a Greek general that comes to Socrates and says, what is justice, Socrates? And he tells Socrates, I think justice is just might makes right. So whoever has the stronger hand politically can dictate what's right and wrong. But by the time Socrates finishes talking with him, he's had his perspective completely reversed. And he says, never mind, Socrates, by talking to you, I now realize that justice is to act from a set of virtues in accordance with what is noble and just and right. So Socrates was cool, and he was able to open people's minds, make them think twice about the things they thought they knew. One of the reasons why he acquired this big reputation was because back then in ancient Greece, there was this cultural superstition that some people had, that there are select individuals who had these powers of prophecy, and that they could understand the underworld and the spirits and what is destined for people. They would call these people seers, or sometimes oracles. And oftentimes they would be blind people, congenitally blind. In their worldview, being born blind endowed you with these other mysterious powers of insight. So there was an oracle at a place called Delphi, and Socrates went there. And the oracle said something to Socrates that puzzled him, because it said, Socrates, here's what my vision tells me, that you are the wisest man in all of Athens. And Socrates was taken aback, huh, me? Because he's very humble. And he said, but I don't know anything. How could I be the wisest man in Athens? Because I just know that I don't know anything. And that was actually exactly it. The oracle told him, and he later discovered, that he was regarded as the wisest of all men because he knows that he knows nothing, whereas everybody else thought that they knew something. And all these other people did not know anything. So there's only one person who knows anything, the one that knows that they don't know. And so Socrates would be that one person. So anyway, he gained this reputation and notoriety for having brilliant conversational and dialectical abilities. And that led to him having a following of younger people, younger men that would go to the town square and just listen to him talk, take notes on his method of dialogue, and try and learn from his lessons. Plato was one of these younger folk that would just go and hang out and listen to Socrates, find him inspiring and cool and interesting. There's even a word that's used in Greek to refer to Socrates' unique method of critical question and answer. And that word is this, elenchus. Elenchus is just a sort of Greek word for Socrates' distinctive method of critical question and answer. In English, we often just call it the Socratic method. Now, not everybody liked Socrates, though. He also was a controversial figure to some people that were in the Athenian government. And basically, behind closed doors in the chambers of government, the Athenians were saying, we don't know if we want Socrates to keep on practicing whatever he calls philosophy in the town square, because we worry that he's causing our young people to think too much outside the box. Maybe he's inspiring them to think in ways that contradict the traditions. Maybe they will no longer believe in the Greek gods. So they sent a message to him, an ultimatum from the court of Athens. They said, Socrates, here's the demand. We need you to stop doing this stuff in the town square because you're really corrupting the youth, or at least we think you are. And if you don't stop, here's the simple rule. We will come back and we'll press charges against you and we'll arrest you, okay? So that was the demand they placed. Now, of course, Socrates, he's defiant to the last. He sees that he's done nothing wrong and that this is just, a completely baseless, unjustified charge against him. So he continues to do as he has done, teaching and practicing philosophy in the town square. But of course, that upset the government. And so they made good on their threat. They came back and arrested him and charged him with corrupting the youth and causing them not to believe in the Greek gods. So Socrates then is placed on trial. Here's a little side note that's interesting. How do we know all these events from Socrates' life? Well, we wouldn't know any of it if Plato didn't write a lot of it down, because Socrates himself never wrote anything. He was just a talker, an orator. In fact, famously, he didn't even really believe in writing. He thought that writing was a way to mischaracterize and take someone out of context that they couldn't defend if they were there to say it on their own. So it was only because of the efforts of Plato and others in the time of Socrates' life that we have these recorded stories and accounts of the things that happened to him. Now, in these Platonic writings, Socrates is most often the character who speaks, the main character, and they sort of read like plays almost, where he's a figure who gives dialogue and lines in the scene. There's always a little historical debate and scholarly debate about how much of the Socrates that appears in the Platonic writings is the genuine historical Socrates, and how much of it is the embellished version of Socrates that is just used by Plato as a vehicle for the expression of his own thoughts. But in truth, it's probably somewhere in the middle, like most things. Many of these accounts are genuine and they can be verified by alternate sources. But probably he did want to use Socrates as a character to express his own ideas in some ways too. Now, the Platonic writings where Socrates is the main character are often called Plato's dialogues, right? And the dialogue that describes the trial of Socrates is called the Apology. So if you guys ever have further studies in ancient Greek philosophy, or if you just take it on as something of your own interest, you could perhaps read sometime the Apology, because that does contain the account of Socrates' trial. So anyway, it's kind of an ironic title, the Apology, because you hear the word apology and you might be thinking, someone's apologetic, they're sorry, they're begging forgiveness. But no, Socrates is not at all ashamed of what he's done or apologetic. He sees the whole proceeding as a farce and like a miscarriage of justice. So the rules back then were that they did have a criminal justice system with a jury trial system. It's sort of like an ancient ancestor of our modern Western court system. But there's a difference. In our system, of course, we impanel like 12 members to a jury selected from the public to weigh in on the case. In the ancient Athenian system, it was much more community involvement. So they would get as many of the adult male citizens as they possibly could to all participate on the jury. So you'd have like hundreds of men sitting in kind of like a Galleria type auditorium seating. And they would be listening to the arguments from the accused and from the court, from the government. Now, they always allow the person to defend themselves, and then they have a prosecutor who tries to press the case against them. There was this one conventional rule they had too, that after the arguments were given on both sides, the accused individual, the defendant, would step in front of the whole court and jury and try to propose a counter penalty. All right, now let me explain that procedure. That would be the point where usually the accused would try to appeal to the mercy of the court and the jurors. And so they would usually try to propose a penalty, if they're found guilty, that is somewhat weaker than the penalty the court and the state had advised. So usually that would be where they would try to sort of finesse a proposed counter penalty that was, less punitive, but still serious enough to show that they took the whole thing, seriously, right? So like in another example, maybe someone was accused of a crime, the court wanted to place them in hard labor for 10 years, and so they go up in front of the whole jury and say, gentlemen of the jury, I'm innocent, but if you do find me guilty, I would humbly ask that you give me a more minor sentence of 5 years hard labor instead of 10, right? So that would be when they would try to appeal to everyone's sense of mercy for a reduced sentence. Anyway, when Socrates had this opportunity after the conclusion of the arguments, so he goes up in front of the whole court and he says, all right, everyone, you've heard all the arguments. They say I'm trying to corrupt the youth. That's totally bogus. They say that I'm trying to ruin Athens. How could I? I love Athens. I'm a patriotic citizen of Athens. I served in its military. I raised my children here. I've lived here my whole life. And I believe in the Greek gods. And so nothing I'm doing corresponds at all to these charges. These are just fake charges, the witch hunt against me. So, I'm innocent. But if you find me guilty, they are proposing the death penalty, okay, which is, of course, the most extreme penalty possible. And he says, that's not right. If I was found guilty, you got to make the punishment fit the crime, so to speak. So let me tell you what would be a better penalty. How about if you do find me guilty, which you shouldn't, but if you do, let's not go with death. That's too extreme. How about lower it down to, are you ready for this? It's kind of funny. How about free lunch for the rest of my life in the auditorium of heroes in Athens. That's what I think you should give me, right? Because you asked me, what do I deserve for what I've done? I don't think you've been listening. You punished someone when they did something wrong. But I've done nothing wrong. In fact, what I'm doing to the contrary is improving the health and the intellectual vitality of Athens. So if I deserve a quote unquote punishment, yeah, free lunch for life at the auditorium of heroes. So really, of course, that's a defiant Socrates refusing to take any kind of punishment or even say that it's appropriate. And not only does he want free lunch for life, but this is like the auditorium of heroes where it's supposed to be reserved for like war heroes and prominent citizens of Athens. So he's asking for great honor. And I don't know if that was perceived as slighting to the court or the jurors, but they deliberated. They came back and returned a guilty verdict. So now Socrates is sentenced to be executed. But there's a little bit more in the little one or two last plot twists here, okay? So in ancient Athens, there was a cultural belief, perhaps a superstition, but they did believe in it, that if you had an accused person sentenced to die, and you had a cargo ship or a shipping mission that was out to sea, that you were supposed to allow it to safely return back to the harbor before you executed the person, because they thought if you did it while the ship was out in the water, it might upset the gods or whatever, and then they would cause the ship to sink and lose all of its men and cargo. So when Socrates had been convicted, there actually was a ship out, and that meant that they had to wait for some time period before they could execute him in a way that they believed would not be upsetting to the gods. So anyway, Socrates is now being held in like a dungeon-like chamber for a week, waiting for the arrival of the ship. And in one of those nights, late at night, while he's awaiting the ship's return. By the way, this is written about in another Platonic dialogue. So if you ever want to see about it, it's called the Kryto. So that's the dialogue that includes the description of what I'm telling you about right now. So anyway, yeah, late one night, Socrates is down in the chamber, and who comes in? It's this young group of guys that are his followers, right? Including Plato. And so they've snuck in there and they're looking at Socrates, and he sees them and they say, hey, Socrates, okay, look, we don't have a lot of time. You already know why we're here, right? You're being convicted for corrupting the youth and messing up, our belief in the Greek gods. And this is totally just complete miscarriage of justice. You're one of the great men of Athens. We have so much respect for you. We can't allow this to happen. We cannot allow you to be executed in this way. And yes, Yuki, the term Platonic is derived from Plato, which I can speak with you about in a moment, but let me get through this last detail. So they say, we got to get you out of here. And what we've done is we bribed some of the guards, and we've got these horse-drawn chariots. We're ready to break you out of prison and take you far away from where you're at right now so that you can continue to do the good work that you've always done, and you will not suffer the indignity of being executed for no good reason. So come on, Socrates, let's go. It's the dead of night. This is your perfect opportunity to escape. What do you think? Did Socrates go, or yes or no? No, he didn't go. Okay, that's right. And let me explain to you his reasoning behind why he didn't want to go. He says, okay, first of all, I agree with you guys. This is a miscarriage of justice. Do I deserve this? No, this is not fair and this is not right. But I also love Athens and I respect our court system. And so I don't want to stand on the principle that when you don't agree with one outcome of justice, that you should then rebel against the punishment or somehow break the law. He didn't want to make people think that he was some kind of like antisocial anarchist who just wanted to live as a fugitive. So even though he knew that the result was deeply offensive to his sense of justice, he thought to respect Athens and not to go down in history as some kind of just criminal that escaped penalty. I'd rather take it on principle. I'll take this punishment on principle because I, again, respect the laws and I respect the court system, even though I don't agree with the outcome in this case. They tried to plead with him. They tried to say to him, come on, Socrates, you got to go. But he gave them additional reasons. He said, look, furthermore, my soul is immortal. So I'm not at all worried about the event of death, because then my soul will just escape into the heavenly forms where they'll be forever. And so I'm not worried about that. And then he also said, I'm an old man at this point. I'm 70 years old. I don't want to live the life of a fugitive, constantly looking over my shoulder, worried about getting apprehended. And he also said, if I lived as a fugitive, I would have to go into exile and abandon Athens, which I'm not going to do. I don't want to leave Athens. I love Athens. This is my whole home. It's where I raised children, served in the military. So I'm going to live and die here. So, they can't convince him despite their best efforts. And that's it. He just refuses to leave. So the next day, I guess, the ship has now returned. And that means that they're able to execute Socrates consistent with their beliefs. So he's forced to drink this poison called hemlock. That was a method of execution. And there's like a famous I think it's like a Renaissance classical painting called The Death of Socrates. And if you ever look at this piece of art, he's reclining on like a table, and he's encircled by this group of young guys, including Plato. And he's got this kind of conspicuous pose where he's pointing his index finger towards the ceiling. And, it's art, so everything is symbolic. What could be the symbolic significance of the pose? It could be there's truth, higher truth that I want you to continue to pursue after I'm gone. Or it could be that, to the heavenly forms, my soul is now going to escape. But anyway, that's the end of his life. And after that, Plato, as he becomes older, he founds the very first institute of higher learning in the West, Plato's Academy, which is kind of like an ancient ancestor to our modern university system. And he ends up having a pupil who is Aristotle, one of the other great Greek philosophers in the lineage of ancient Greece. And so that kind of passes the torch of this Greek knowledge and philosophy from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle. Then later on, Aristotle, when he becomes an older guy, he's a tutor to Alexander the Great, who then ends up conquering a whole bunch of lands in Europe and beyond, and that further preserves and spreads the Greek doctrines. And of course, here we are, it's thousands of years later, and we're still talking about the life and time of Socrates. So I've often thought that it was perhaps a wise decision, in a sense, for him to have taken the penalty, because it really enhanced the quality of his legacy. He almost stands as like a martyr-like figure for the establishment of Western philosophy. And I think that just makes his example more durable and powerful for all the generations that have followed afterwards. So I'm just giving you that little piece of background. It's a little bit of a historical aside, of course. Our topics are much more in depth onto epistemology itself. But since we're reading a piece by Plato, and it involves the teacher Socrates, I would like to have told you about that. Some of you may have studied it or heard about it in another context, but that's just a nice condensed version of the facts. So anyway, next thing then is to talk about the Meno, which is this Platonic dialogue that we've been assigned to read from the textbook. So the Meno by Plato. Meno is just the name of this Greek general that he's having a conversation with in the dialogue. And we've got another meeting designated for this, so I might break soon because I don't think I'll be able to go through all the notes on the Meno in the last few minutes, but I don't want to rush it either. So I'll just say a few words and then we'll really begin with this on Tuesday. So to Socrates and Meno, the question is about if a person knows how to get to a certain location, couldn't they lead people there based on their knowledge? So there's a city called Larissa, which is like 100 miles north of Athens. It's also in Greece. And that's where Meno is originally from. They're talking in Athens. And so Socrates asks this to Meno. He says, a man who knew the way to Larissa or anywhere else that you like and went there and guided others would surely lead them well and correctly? And Meno responds, certainly, Socrates. Okay, so all that part is saying is, if you know how to get somewhere and you've made the journey many times from point A to B, where B is the destination, couldn't you lead a new person to B just based on the knowledge that you have? Okay, so like say that we were in the physical classroom now. It's helpful when we are because this point comes through really easily. But suppose that we were, and I just say to you, don't you know how to get to your house from this classroom? Certainly you would, of course, because that's your house. Since you know how to get there, what if you made a friend in class and you wanted to hang out and show them like your place, go over and play video games or something? Certainly you could correctly lead them to your place because you have knowledge of how to get there from this other location, the classroom, okay? So that's all he's asking, just kind of transposed onto a more modern example. If you know the location and how to get there from where you're at, couldn't you just lead someone else that's never been there to that place? And of course the answer is yes. Then Socrates follows with a second question, which is, what if someone had a correct opinion about how to get there, but they didn't know how to get there and they've never made the journey themselves? Wouldn't they also lead correctly as long as they just had a correct opinion about the location? And again, Meno, the general, says yes. So maybe that's where I want to leave it because I don't want to spoil too many of the details too early. But what we will learn next is, what is the difference between knowing how to get there and just having a correct opinion as to how to get there? What's the difference between the two? And why is it better to have real knowledge about the location versus just having an opinion that turns out to be correct? And this is going to help us to see in full depth the different criteria for knowledge that the Greek thought was so important, in particular, the role that justification plays. Yeah, Yuki, it is kind of like instructions. and I was going to say this, but I'll say it now. When you don't know how to get to a place in the modern world, you can still find your way by using a tool like a Google Maps or some kind of GPS navigation system. And so it's kind of like that. He's saying, what if a person's never been there, but they're relying on an accurate map? Couldn't they still get there and lead people with the accurate map as long as it is accurate? And Meno will say yes. But there's a difference, and there's a reason that it's better to really know your way by heart on your own, having knowledge, versus having to rely on an external aid, which happens to be correct, but which you don't know whether you can trust. And so that's the thing that we'll try to develop next time. Why is it a superior state to having the actual knowledge as opposed to having a correct opinion, even though it is correct? And so, yeah, that'll be our topic that we'll start with on Tuesday. But I guess for now, we're good for today's meeting. So I want to thank you guys for attending, and I'll send you the link for the upcoming Tuesday meeting in the next day or so. I'll also post the recorded lecture here that we've had, and you'll have that in your records as well on Canvas if you want to ever view this meeting and go back and look at any of the discussion or notes that we've talked about. So today, what we've talked about are some basic vocabulary terms to get started in epistemology. We've learned what's a proposition, what is truth, what is belief, what is justification, and what is an epistemic agent. We've then seen how the ancient Greek account of knowledge was justified true belief, according to which all the conditions are required, each one, but no single one or even 2 out of 3 is enough without the others. So they're all required. They have to all be jointly satisfied in order to be sufficient for knowledge. Then we started talking about the life and history of Plato and Socrates. I just told you about his trial and death and how that happened. And now we're getting to the point of finally breaking down the first writing assignment or reading assignment, which is Plato's dialogue, the Meno. We only have 2 pages of it assigned in our book, so it's a quite short reading, but that's what we will really explore and expand on next time, I guess. So for the time being, I'll let you guys go, but if you want, go ahead and, let me see one more comment here, Armand. If there's one thing Socrates said he knew, it was that he could differentiate between true opinion and knowledge. Yes, that's what he says at the end of the dialogue. He says, I don't think I know much, but if there's one thing I know, it's that there's a difference between having a correct opinion and knowledge. And then Meno's like, rightly so, Socrates, by Zeus, which is like their old-fashioned way of saying by God, because that's like the major god in the Greek pantheon. Anyway, though, guys, let me hear it from you if you want to say goodbye, because I don't want to stop the stream before you do. Okay, thanks again, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend, and we'll be in touch. Follow the announcements, and I'll see you then on Tuesday next time. Okay, bye-bye.
Good, doctor.
Thank you.
Good one.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks again. I'll see you guys soon.